He gave away everything he had, and when someone asked him why, he said he asked for it. Not with shame, not with regret, with the flat, tired certainty of a man describing the weather. 6,000 francs, an entire inheritance, handed over to a brother who everyone, including a second brother who begged him not to do it, knew would run through it in weeks. And he did run through it. And the wife left. And the man who gave the money away said he would give another 6,000 if he had it. No anger, no grief, only that quiet, enormous openness, the openness of someone who has never once built a wall and cannot understand why he keeps getting cold. This is not the story of a fool. Go back further and you find someone who stayed at a cruel master's side for 2 years after every other apprentice had run. Someone who moved to Paris and worked for poor wages helping a sister-in-law no one else would help. Someone who was dragged places he didn't want to go, who smiled, who adjusted, who found a way to be useful wherever he was put. At every turn, the world tested whether he would leave, and at every turn he stayed. He was the good one, reliable, warm, always available. The kind of person you call at 2 in the morning knowing he will pick up. The kind of person who shows up to help you move and never once checks the time. We love this person. We also, if we are honest, find something suffocating in his presence. Because being near someone who will not push back, who agrees, who absorbs, who gives, creates a particular kind of unease. You begin to wonder what you are actually talking to. You make a small, unfair demand to see what happens. Nothing happens. You make a larger one. Still nothing. And slowly you understand that this person has handed you not just their time and their money and their attention, but something more total than that. The entire territory of the self. There are no fences here. No signs. Walk anywhere you like. He learned this early. The whipping boy at school. The one who stayed. Somewhere in childhood, having needs of his own started to feel like a very dangerous thing. A door that if opened would end something, break something, make someone go away. So he built a face for every table. A face that said, "I'm fine, I'm here, I need nothing, take what you want." That face became the persona. The face you learned to show at the table so that dinner wouldn't end badly. Useful armor. Worn so long it started to feel like skin. And underneath that skin, untouched for decades, something else waited. Call it the understudy who has been standing in the wings every night while the lead performs. The shadow, patient, knowing every line. It has been there since the first time he swallowed a no and made it sound like yes. It has been watching. It is not angry yet, or perhaps it has been angry the whole time, and he simply has no language for it. So here is the question that hangs in the room with him. He is not a bad person, and he is not even a weak one. What then is this? And what has it cost him to call it goodness? So when he handed that money over and felt nothing, no anger, no grief, only that flat, exhausted certainty. The question is not whether he was good. The question is what kind of good it was. Where did it come from? What was it made of? Because there are two kinds of feeling that can look identical from the outside. There is the feeling that rises from inside a person, their own preference, their own warmth, their own genuine yes, and there is feeling that has been calibrated to the room. Not manufactured, not fake, but shaped entirely by what the other person needs, what the situation calls for, what will keep the temperature comfortable. When he said the painting was beautiful, it was not a lie. When he said his brother had asked for it, it was not a performance. He meant it. But he meant it the way a mirror means a reflection, oriented entirely outward, perfectly adjusted to its object, with no particular interior of its own. Every yes he gave was an act of adjustment, not self-expression. He had learned so thoroughly, so early, to read the room and arrange himself accordingly, that the subjective layer, the part of him where preferences lived, where refusals lived, where the particular texture of his own wanting lived, had gone quiet. Not gone. Quiet. That is an important distinction. The room does not disappear when you stop visiting it, and here is how to understand what that means. The unconscious is not a void beneath the floor, not an empty basement of suppressed memories. Think of it instead as a second room in the same house, fully furnished, always occupied, full of the things you moved out of the main room because they didn't fit the decor. A standing lamp you didn't like the look of. Old photographs. A chair that was comfortable but embarrassing. The person who lives in the house never walks in there. But the room exists, and it has opinions about the rest of the house. What he had sent into that second room over the course of a lifetime was not dramatic. It was not murderous rage or shameful crime. It was softer than that. Ordinary refusals, ordinary angers, ordinary moments of wanting something for himself and deciding, without quite deciding, not to want it. This is the difference between suppression and repression, and it matters. Suppression is a conscious moral choice. It is the decision to hold your tongue at a funeral, to wait before sending the email, to choose the difficult path deliberately. Suppression costs something. Sometimes it causes suffering, but it is chosen, owned, done in full awareness. Repression is something else entirely. It is a half-conscious looking the other way, a dropping of hot cakes the moment they get too warm to hold. Not a decision so much as a habit of non-decision, avoiding the thing before you've even fully registered that the thing is there. You don't choose not to be angry. You simply don't notice that you are. This is what happened to him, over and over, at every table he arranged himself for. Not suppression, but repression. Not chosen suffering, but quiet avoidance. The anger never arrived as anger. The refusals never arrived as refusals. They went sideways, into the second room, into the shadow, the understudy now carrying years of lines he was never permitted to deliver. And here is where it becomes a problem that no amount of goodness can solve. Because nature, it turns out, does not distinguish between the conscious sinner and the unconscious one. The man who knows he is angry and acts on it badly, the world holds accountable. But the man who never notices his anger, who walks in such good faith through his own repression that he would pass any test of character, nature punishes him just as severely, just in a different direction. It comes out as mood, as a sourness that descends for no traceable reason, as a coldness that arrives when someone gets too close to the line, as those hellish, inexplicable darknesses that make the most virtuous people in the house suddenly intolerable to live with, because what has no legitimate outlet does not disappear, it tunnels, and eventually it surfaces somewhere the person cannot trace back to its source. He had not harmed anyone. He had not raised his voice. His goodness was real. It simply was not whole. It was the performing half, the outward half, the adjusted half. And the other half, the one with refusals in it, with angers and preferences and desires, had been withheld so long it had ceased to be a conscious secret and become something closer to a standing verdict. Not a memory, a standing decision about what is allowed, what is safe, what must be kept quiet. An old emotional ruling that had never been appealed. The warmth was real, the help was real, and somewhere in that second room, undisturbed for decades, something else was equally real, equally patient, and beginning in the only language left to it, to make itself known. Think of a man who organized his whole life around love, not as a private feeling, but as an architectural principle. He wrote about it, taught it, built his community's entire structure on it. God is love, he said. Perfect love casts out fear. He who hates his brother cannot love God. He meant every word. These were not platitudes to him, not phrases borrowed from a tradition and repeated without inspection. They were the load-bearing walls of his interior house, the frame around which everything else was arranged. When he sat with someone suffering, he gave. When a dispute arose in his community, he counseled patience, forgiveness, the turning of the other cheek. When he felt the first flicker of irritation, at a colleague who undermined him, at a follower who proved weak, at the creeping suspicion that some in his flock were paying lip service rather than living truth, he did not act on it. He named it what it was, darkness. And darkness had no place in the architecture of perfect love. So he set it aside. The trouble is what happens to what you set aside. Think of a river that's been dammed. The water does not stop. The water does not give up and go home. It finds a new channel, sideways, under, around, and the longer the dam holds, the harder the new channel cuts. This is what the unconscious does with everything you refuse to feel. Every dark feeling this man set aside, every irritation, every buried doubt, every moment of rage he never named, did not evaporate in the light of his goodness. It went underground and kept cutting. And the whole time he was at the table, counseling love, he genuinely did not know what was accumulating beneath the floor. Not because he was dishonest, Because the rooms had been sealed so long, he had stopped noticing there were rooms. This is what it means to live dissociated from your own interior. Not a split that announces itself dramatically, not a crisis, but something quieter and more total, like a man who lives in the front rooms of a house and has sealed off the back. The back rooms don't disappear. The walls don't stop standing. Things keep happening in them. Temperature changes, slow leaks, the settling of weight. He genuinely does not know what is occurring back there. He doesn't experience himself as a man with a sealed-off house. He experiences himself as a man who lives in a warm, well-lit room and has everything he needs. He had everything he needed, except self-reflection. He was a bit too sure that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. Sure that he who is born of God commits no sin. Sure that love, practiced with sufficient devotion, leaves no remainder. He was so sure that he never asked what his certainty was compensating for. And a certainty that has never asked what it's compensating for is not really certainty at all. It is, underneath, a sustained refusal to look in a particular direction, a standing verdict about what must remain unseen. And then the revelation came, not as peace, not as confirmation of everything he had built. It came as something barely recognizable, a vision of catastrophe, of seals being broken and riders being unleashed, of a lamb that had ceased to be meek and become something animal-shaped and monstrous. 7 eyes, 7 horns, more ram than lamb, loosing 4 sinister horsemen on the world. From the 5th seal, martyrs crying for vengeance. How long before you judge and avenge our blood? From the 6th, a cosmic destruction so total that everything alive hides from the wrath of the Lamb, not the gentle figure who allowed himself to be led to slaughter, something that had been held back a very long time and had finally arrived with the force of everything that was owed. He did not experience this as his own darkness. That is the critical thing. He did not wake from the vision and think, I have found my shadow. He experienced it as truth, as revelation, as the Word of God breaking through the surface of ordinary time. The fury did not arrive labeled as fury. It arrived dressed in the absolute, in the language of cosmic certainty, of prophecy, of a holy wrath that vindicates all suffering and burns the world clean. Because that is what happens to accumulated darkness when it finally moves. The further it has had to travel to get out, and his had traveled very far, through decades of exemplary love, through years of careful virtue, the more force it carries when it arrives. And the more force it carries, the more it must justify itself as something beyond personal. No one experiences their own long-suppressed rage as petty. It arrives as revelation, as vision, as the voice of something larger than the self. The person does not own it. They receive it. This is the logic of what the soul does when it has been held to a single total expression for too long. The more complete the goodness, the more complete the eruption. The louder the proclamation of love, the further the accumulated fury has to travel, and the further it travels, the holier it sounds when it finally speaks. But not every life contains a vision. Not everyone's suppressed anger bursts outward as a book of catastrophe. Most lives are ordinary. And so the question settles into the room with you. If the fury doesn't arrive as revelation, if there is no cosmic stage for it to perform on, where does it go? What does it look like when it can't announce itself as holy, when it has to live inside an ordinary house, behind an ordinary face, in the silence between two people who love each other and cannot say why the temperature just dropped? Think about someone you know, or think about yourself. The person who never raises their voice, the one who says it's fine, who means it when they say it, who would give anything if asked, and frequently does. You have started to be careful around them, not because they are dangerous, not because anything they have ever done has warranted it, but because there is something in the room with them, a weather, a pressure that has no name and no face. You notice you choose your words more carefully than you used to. You notice that when they say it's fine, you do not quite believe them, and you also cannot locate a single moment when they were anything other than fine. This is the part that unsettles you. The math doesn't add up. All that accommodation and no remainder. All that yes and no remainder. It makes no sense unless there is a room you're not being shown. And if the person is you, and let's sit with that for a moment, because for many of you, this is exactly who you are, then the experience is different from the inside. From the inside, it does not feel like suppression. It does not feel like fear. It feels like consideration. It feels like maturity, restraint, the dignified choice to pick your battles. You are kind to everyone. You do not say no, or when you say it, you feel so guilty about it that you immediately offer something else, a compromise, a softening, a way to still be useful. In some rooms, you are exhausted before the conversation begins, and you cannot always explain why. You walk in carrying something heavy that you cannot set down because you cannot quite name it. You are the person they call because you always pick up. You are the person who shows up. You are good at this. You have always been good at this. And it has cost you something you have not yet calculated. Here is the part that matters. Here is the part that requires a certain courage to look at directly. In the dark, in private, in the space between waking and sleep, or in a moment of unexpected solitude, or in the split second after someone asks you for something and before you say yes, you think things you would never say. Cold things, things with edges. The flat, contemptuous thought about the colleague who got the recognition you didn't. The gloating flicker when someone you resented failed. The rage that surfaces at 3 in the morning, clean and specific and aimed at a person you would describe to anyone as your closest friend, your partner, someone you love. You think coarsely, precisely, unsparingly, exactly what the situation has earned. And then you disown it. Not dramatically. You don't recoil. You simply move past it, the way you would step around something on the sidewalk without looking down. You do not consider yourself a person who thinks those things. You are not compelled to say or do them. And so you treat the thinking as if it does not count. But it counts. This is not a flaw in your character. This is not evidence that the goodness was a lie. The goodness is real. The warmth is real. The genuine care you extend to the people around you is not performance. It is who you are, or who you have become, or who you learned to be early enough that the learning and the being are now indistinguishable. What is also real, equally you, equally present in the house, is the other voice, the one that has been withheld. And here is the thing that nature will not allow you to pretend your way past. A withheld affect is as isolating and as guilt-laden as a conscious secret. There is nothing more unendurable, not eventually, not in the long run, but now as a daily fact, than a tepid harmony built on the withholding of feeling. The repressed emotion does not dissolve in the warmth of your goodness. It finds a channel. It tunnels. It arrives as silence that has weight, as care that somehow leaves the other person feeling surveilled, as a fine that is not fine, that has never once been fine, and that everyone in the room knows is not fine except the person saying it. The shock of recognition, if it's landing right now, if there is a face in your mind, or a face you are avoiding looking at, is not a verdict against you. It is not evidence that you are secretly a bad person, that the kindness was hollow, that you owe someone an apology for your inner monologue. It is evidence that you are whole, that you contain more than the persona has been permitted to express. That somewhere in the second room of yourself, behind the face you learned to wear at the table so that dinner wouldn't end badly, there is something alive that has been standing in the wings for a very long time. And this is the precise thing that is now required of you. Not to perform the darkness to prove you have it, not to burn something down, but to acknowledge, to yourself, without the immediate pivot to shame or justification, that the cold thought was yours, that the contempt was yours, that the exhaustion in the doorway before the conversation begins is information about your actual interior, not a malfunction to be corrected. The acknowledgement is the act, not the fixing, not yet. What happens if you admit it, even once, even quietly, even only to yourself, is the question you are now standing in front of. Think of a man who gives everything away. Not metaphorically, literally. The money, the time, the decade of himself. He gives it until there is nothing left to give, and then he gives the nothing, and then someone asks him why, and he says he asked for it. Flat and certain, the way you describe weather. And the giving feels like goodness, and it is goodness. It has always been goodness, but somewhere in the machinery of all that giving, something else has been running very quietly in the background. A question he has never asked. A room in the house he has never opened. And then something breaks. Not dramatically, Not all at once. But one day, in the split second after someone asks him for something and before his mouth opens to say yes, he notices it. A flicker, a coldness, a thing in him that does not want to give. That is not for a very long time wanted to give. And it is not anger exactly. It is not even refusal. It is something stranger and more primary than that. It is the first faint contour of what he actually wants to keep. This is the moment Job is in at the end of all his suffering. He has seen something that he cannot fully describe. He lays his hand over his mouth. He does not announce what he has understood. He says only, "Things too wonderful for me, which I did not know." The words are humble. They may also be equivocal. He has learned what was actually underneath the agreement he thought he had with goodness, and the discovery has not destroyed him. It has changed him in the direction of more, not less, more specific, more present, more here. This is what integration asks of you. Not to become cruel, not to reclaim the darkness by performing it, but to recognize, without the immediate pivot to shame, that the cold thought was yours, the contempt was yours, the exhaustion in the doorway was information and not malfunction. That the part of you you have been calling the enemy is not your enemy. It is the part of you that has needs. It is the part of you that knows what you want to keep. Consider what projection actually is. The way you see a stranger across the room and feel an immediate, inexplicable contempt. What you are looking at is something inside yourself that you have not claimed yet, cast onto someone who resembles it. The intensity of the feeling is a compass. It points inward. What you cannot tolerate in them is the thing in you that has had no permission to exist. And here is what no one tells you about the moment you stop running, the moment you turn and actually look. Something unexpected happens. You start to take up more room, not loudly, not destructively, in the way that living things do when they finally have enough space. A tree given room does not burn down the forest. It simply grows in directions it couldn't before. So the door that remains open after all of this is not a question about what you've withheld or how long you've been withholding it. It is a simpler question. The man who gave everything away is standing in a room, and for the first time in his life, he is asking himself what, if anything, he wants to keep. What is the answer?